Big Descriptions disrupts traditional educational methods. And why do we do that? Because we want to help humans thrive where they are, building better communities. One way that we do that is the Elephant in the Room Unboxed, where we give our audience members the tools and the resources to have those uncomfortable conversations and do it in a humane and anthropological way. We're doing this in partnership with Respect Diversity, another organization that is committed to doing the work with us. Each episode will have a different host and a different guest talking about uncomfortable conversations or uncomfortable topics and giving you the resources of how to navigate them. Let's get uncomfortable.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Elephant in the Room Unboxed podcast. I'm Dr. Noel Jacobs. I am the Executive Director of the Respect Diversity Foundation and a clinical child and health psychologist here in Oklahoma City. This program is about unpacking important and difficult topics from experts in the field and in the community around us. Our goal is to look at culture and history, anthropology, both ancient and modern life, so that we understand each other better and can make this world better for all. This morning, my guest is Dr. Delores Bigfoot, a child psychologist by training and a presidential professor who directs the Indian Country Child Trauma Center within the Center on Child Abuse and Neglect at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. In 2020, she was awarded the National Suicide Prevention Resource Center a $47 million award from SAMHSA to provide training and technical efforts throughout the country on suicide prevention. Since 1994, she has directed Project Making Medicine, a clinical training program to train mental health providers in the treatment of child maltreatment using culturally based teaching. With the establishment of the Indian Country Child Trauma Center in 2004, Dr. Bigfoot was instrumental in the cultural adaptations of evidence-based child treatment. Under her guidance, 4 evidence-based treatments were enhanced for American Indian and Alaskan Native families in Indian Country, titled the Honoring Children series. One of the 4 is Honoring Children, Mending the Circle, a cultural enhancement of trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy for use with American Indian and Alaska Native children and their families. Dr. Bigfoot has over 15 published articles and chapters, including serving as the lead author of the recent publication, Adapting Evidence-Based Treatment for Use with American Indians and Native Alaskan Children and Youth. Dr. Bigfoot has served as principal investigator on 16 federally funded projects. She currently serves on the Federal Commission on Native Children, whose mission is to make recommendations to improve conditions affecting American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children and their families. Dr. Bigfoot has over 30 years of experience and is knowledgeable about the concerns of implementation and adaptation of evidence-based practice being introduced in Indian Country. Dr. Bigfoot is a member of the National TFCBT Trainer Network. She is also an enrolled member of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma with affiliation to the Northern Cheyenne Tribe of Montana, where her children are enrolled members. Good morning, Dr. Bigfoot, and welcome to the Elephant in the Room Unboxed. We're honored to have you with us and to discuss your work and your understanding of American Indian youth and their diverse communities. Please give our listeners, after that introduction, a little bit of a concrete idea of the kind of work you do both in and out of your role as a child psychologist.
My role as a child psychologist is minimal. I am on faculty at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, but the majority of my time there has been developing and delivering different kind of training or technical assistance consultation to federally recognized tribes, tribal organizations, state and federal agencies or organizations. And so a lot of it has been being the interpreter of what would be helpful for our underserved populations, particularly American Indian and Alaska Native, but also what might be reflected in other underserved cultures, and where inequity or lack of services impacts the quality of life, and giving opportunities to give voice to how do we bring more equity and inclusion into our communities, and how that would be beneficial to children and youth and families.
You used a really important word a moment ago. You called yourself an interpreter. And most people think of that as a language-based service to help people understand something the same way through language. But it sounds like you mean much more than language difference.
I think words have certain values for certain cultures, and that interpreter has a harsh history, certainly with American Indians and Alaskan Native populations, or populations that have different language expressions, different native tongues, and that there have been individuals that have taken on the term of language interpreters, even though they're just called interpreters. But I think that we need to be able to have an understanding of systems. We need to have an understanding of policies, of laws, of assumptions. We need to have an understanding of biases and unconscious biases included, and just the nature of what it means to be in a disadvantaged position, because a lot of that might come from ignorance, and some of it may be more deliberate, and it could just be because of generational biases and assumptions. And so how do we have conversations if our understandings are not from the same place? And even names, when we have generational names. So, for example, my great grandmother's name, English name, was Pauline Washington, but her Caddo name was Tinhue. And the reason why she was named Washington was because her great grandfather was given an English name of Washington. He was given the name George Washington. That was the name that was written down. That was the name that became official. That became the how the written word has been established as official and as the rule of law. And yet his Caddo name bears much more understanding, and her name bears more understanding in terms of them as spiritual beings, them as individuals within a cultural circle.
Sure.
Their understanding within certain kinds of space, and how they're connected to past generations, and then how they're connected to present generations. So I think that when we talk about interpreter, it's what is the role of helping people understand how various elements impact their quality of life, and how that impacts the decisions that they make, and the opportunities that they have, and their hopes and dreams for things to improve their own lives, and as well as the lives of their children. How many generations does a family think that they can have impact and be able to tell the stories going forward?
Sure.
So, for example, in our family, and I think this is common for many American Indian families, generations of more than 7 we consider that each generation is important and have connections to each generation,
Mm-hmm.
backwards and forwards. And so this understanding of multiple generation impact is critical as we think about this space. But for the most part, for the majority of families in our United States and English speaking communities, maybe knowing their parents and grandparents, occasionally great grandparents, but they may not necessarily have understandings beyond the second or third generation.
Sure.
How do we bring the stories forward, and how do we tell those stories that come from these different generations, and how do we learn from their stories? So I think my role in terms of that interpreter is to help create a bigger environment in order to have conversations.
That's a beautiful long view of what we need to keep in mind, especially considering how easy it is for us to really just focus on only the right now. That seems so common in current culture and time that we're really only thinking about just yesterday, today, and maybe tomorrow. But you're taking a 7-generation view, and when you're speaking with people, that's part of your role in interpreting, is to make sure that that perspective is continued. You have personal, training specific, and practice knowledge of the shared American Indian experience and the impact of their history on their presence in the world today. Early in my time with you, because my friendship with you goes back several years, you taught me much about the 39 federally recognized American Indian tribes in Oklahoma and of the more than 200 tribes that existed before the arrival of Europeans. One of the most important things I learned from you, is about the diversity of cultural knowledge and ways of knowing both within and between tribes, and how humility, rather than bold assumption of knowledge, is crucial to developing understanding. Could you say a little bit about what you do within and between tribes and non-tribal entities related to this, your role in interpreting, and how other people need to take that perspective of humility, and why that understanding and approach is so important?
I would like to clarify something.
Sure.
So there's 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma, and there are more than 200 representatives of other tribes that live outside Oklahoma, within Oklahoma. For example, my children are Northern Cheyenne, and they live in Oklahoma, so they're part of the 200.
Okay.
Currently, there are over 575 federally recognized tribes across the United States, continental United States. And then there are many state recognized tribes, plus tribal entities that are seeking federal recognition. And there are other organizations or other linkages that have that generational connection. So recognizing that they have, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generations back, and their stories that connect them to land, connect them to sacred sites, connect them to the earth and their homelands. And but they're not part of federally recognized tribes. And the status of being federally recognized is that there is a recognition by the federal government that there is a formal government and political government that a tribe allows them to have a constitution and allows them to have sovereignty as a federally recognized tribe. And so the understanding that there are 575 tribes, I think, is very important. Okay. And there are membership, or there is eligibility as citizens to be part of those tribes with particular criteria. And I forgot your question.
Sure. And thank you for the clarification on different tribal status and the true number,
Okay.
of who is out there. So the question is about the importance of a perspective of humility in engaging with people with different backgrounds from our own when you're doing this work, but also in general.
I have been very fortunate. I have been extremely blessed, abundantly blessed to have invitations to participate with tribes from across the nation. The tribes in Alaska, California, New York, Maine, Florida,
Mm-hmm.
Arizona, the Midwest. I have been very fortunate to be extended an invitation to enter into their current homelands and to enjoy their generosity, to be embraced by their generosity and their willingness to think that I have something worthwhile to share with them. And I think when we think of some of the traditions that we have within our communities, it's about gifts that are given and gifts that are taken. And I think of an invitation as being a gift, that I received a gift of invitation to come in and be part of different tribal communities. And I think that invitation is humbling. That someone would think it was, or a tribal entity would think it was worthwhile for me to come and be in their presence and and share their space and to be welcome, that they have songs of welcome, that they offer gifts, that they provide time to set aside to listen. So I think when we think about the invitation, that I think of it as a gift, and I think that being offered a gift without real strings attached, or that there's not a demand in some. It's a gentle invitation. I think that for me is humbling. That's for me, and to have someone say, "I heard you, when you spoke, for this group, and we want you to come and can you tell our community these things?" And I think that I talked about my great grandmother Tinhu, who on paper is called Pauline Washington. I was fortunate, not just me, but my siblings, my cousins, my aunties and uncles. All of us. We were raised with 2 or 3 or 4 generations in the home, and my great grandmother was born in the 1870s, and she lived to be almost 100. My grandmother lived to be almost 100, and my mother lived to be 2 months short of 101.
Oh wow!
So what we can say is that all of our generations, all of the generations from those times, we touch history. We got to hold hands with history, and as they became blind or frail or needed support in some way, we got to be that support for that history.
Sure.
And the teachings and understandings and the ideas and concepts that were shared in just living. And a lot of that is what I share when I go into communities. So it was a gift given to me that I can, create words for, and again, that interpreter, to give to and present to other community members, to present to invited community members. And so it was a gift given to me, a gift I present to them, and a gift that they can, take forward and present to others, or to share with others. So I think that understanding of, I'm not there simply because I have a unique thing to deliver. I'm there because I received a gift, and that gift is being shared. And so the gift to me is that invitation. The gift that I give is what was given to me.
That's a beautiful way of seeing interaction with a group that is different from the group that you've lived your experience with. Mentioning your relatives who had two names, who had the traditional name given to them by members of their family and tribe, and the name that was assigned to them that is a Western name that in a sense really represents that they have to live in two cultures. They don't have a choice in that sense in terms of where they will necessarily find themselves going because of these systems, the federal system and the tribal system, the nations around them that they live within. There's history in that, and every experience is going to be different person by person, but yet there's this perspective that we have to consider, that although there is so much diversity across the landscape between American Indian individuals and tribes, there is a piece of this that is shared history, that is specifically the trauma that was visited broadly on these civilizations and societies here at the time that European forces and colonists pushed across the land. That means with that come perceptions and misperceptions, especially as hundreds of years has gone by. There are still issues that people deal with, but there are ways that people think about that history and about the cultures that were harmed and changed in powerful ways since then. And I'm wondering what is important for me, for listeners, to understand about the perceptions and misperceptions that we might be carrying around for a history that we share somewhat, but we can feel so easily removed from at different times, especially non-native individuals in the country. What are things that we need to understand about that maybe we don't?
Well, I think that's why we're having the conversation. And it is not a conversation that just started.
Right.
It's been ongoing. And it's not a conversation that will end when we stop our individual conversation right now.
Today, sure.
And there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of policies that impact a variety of people that today we're still having repercussions from. So I was listening to NPR, and there's a court case that a tribal individual from the northeast part of the state is saying that the state court prosecution of him was not valid because he's a tribal member and the crime was committed on tribal land. Therefore, it should go through federal court versus a crime that was committed on state land. And the criteria for the prosecution would be under state jurisdiction versus federal jurisdiction, which is what the 39 tribes in Oklahoma are functioning under as political governments, is federal jurisdiction and tribal sovereignty. So a system that was set up over 100 years ago, when the state when Oklahoma acquired statehood in 1907, is still that jurisdictional issue is still being challenged today, and it's impacting the lives of people currently. And it was a current story in this morning on NPR.
Sure.
So, as for example, when Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory, which is what encompasses the current state of Oklahoma boundaries, was first proposed, it was for a sanctuary for American Indian tribes that were being moved into Oklahoma state boundaries, current state boundaries. At the time, there were primarily 2 tribes that were in Oklahoma permanently, even though there were tribes that migrated through Oklahoma.
Sure.
So the Caddos, of which I am an enrolled member, had a very large territory, including Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana. I mean, we had a confederacy that was very large. And today, our Caddo Nation of Oklahoma has a very small 15 or 20 acreage that's a tribal complex at the Binger Y outside of Binger, Oklahoma. When we had many confederacies across several state boundaries currently. And the Wichita tribe is another one that was here. Whereas now we have 39 tribes that call Oklahoma home, and that they exercise their tribal sovereignty through their state, not supposed to be state, through their tribal governments.
Sure.
And then many of those tribal governments, for example, the Cheyenne Arapaho are a confederate tribe of 2 tribes with a government, whereas originally they were 2 separate tribal entities. And in fact, there's Northern Arapaho and Southern Arapaho. There's Arapaho in Oklahoma as well as in Wyoming. There's Southern Cheyenne and Northern Cheyenne in Montana. There's Seminole tribe in Oklahoma as well as in Florida. So what we see is that the policies over the last, that occurred even over 100 years ago is still impacting individuals today, because many of them are not in their homeland. They don't have access to things that they had cultural teachings around, so their or spiritual practices around. And I hope I don't get this incorrect, but for example, the Fort Sill Apache in Oklahoma were Geronimo's band that went to Fort Marion, St. Augustine, Florida, as prisoners of war, as captives. And then Geronimo was returned back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He still remained a prisoner of war as a captive, and his band of 600 plus came back to Oklahoma and didn't want to leave him, even though originally they were from Arizona, New Mexico area. And so now we have a federally recognized tribe as Fort Sill Apache, which they had nothing to do with Oklahoma originally.
Sure.
But now it's their homeland. And they're have managed to increase considerably, managed to survive, managed to establish programs. And they have some of the strongest programs around, violence against American Indian women. They really have tried to highlight equity and an understanding of the impact of violence in tribal communities. So they've done a lot of building capacity. So as we think about, the policies from 100 years ago or 110 years ago or even, 130 years ago, those same policies are impacting us today in various ways. And when we think about, why are we dealing with reservation boundaries?
Mm-hmm.
It's because of federal law that was established and trying to tease out what that means for tribal sovereignty, as well as, the state challenging. And so there's a lot of court cases that go all the way to the Supreme Court
Mm-hmm.
that determine status. And so that has impact with our tribal communities today.
And it's still, a little bit ago, you used the word sovereignty. And that is a concept, I think, also that is poorly understood, especially by modern Americans who are not part of tribes and who don't understand the complex history that you just described. Beginning with invasion and territorial loss and human life loss, but these changes of where tribes live and how they live, who they interact with, what they're allowed to do on their land and not allowed to do on their land. Could you say a little bit about sovereignty from your understanding and why it is so important in the health and the future of a tribal community?
Well, there is a legal definition of sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
and I am not a
legal
licensed
expert.
attorney.
Sure.
So I can give you my impression. I can be that interpreter and
Perfect.
allow for conversations to be had about what the impact of sovereignty is. So I think there's a lot of language around food sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
water sovereignty, land sovereignty. And I think the thing that we want to be able to say is that tribes who have sovereign rights have the power and authority to make decisions about their citizens, about the land that they possess, about their air quality, about their water access, that they get to make decisions, that they have the right and responsibility to take care of their citizens in the best way possible, and that the sovereignty has been challenged in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where a lot of the Supreme Court cases get ruled on about how much decision making and legislative and law enforcement that tribes have around their own ability to govern. And so there's a lot of background about how tribes govern, and so the governance is that sovereignty. The sovereignty allows for decision making and trying to bring more power and equity to tribal governments. And I think that there's also we probably talk a lot about individually about individual rights, and individual rights is about individual sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
We hear about what people can do in their own homes. They should have the right of privacy, and or like with their doctors or their lawyers, they should have the right of confidentiality, and they should be able to tell their religious leaders things. And so I think there's a lot of conversations around what it might mean in terms of individual, in terms of political groups or governance, and the recognition that tribes have sovereignty actually started back when the colonization period started after 1491, and there were foreign governments that recognized the tribes as governments.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made treaties with them and established their and acknowledged their rights of a government. And so, as we said, how far back does policy go that still impacts us today? So when the foreign governments, not individual colonists, but when foreign governments recognize tribes as a government that they could make a agreement with or a treaty with, then that established their sovereign status.
Okay.
And it was through that the federal government and through their federal policies established that same federal status with tribes, and that's how we have federally recognized tribes. So you can't have a federally recognized tribe without having also tribal sovereignty. And earlier you mentioned that I'm on the Commission for Native Children,
right,
which is a federal legislation that was a bipartisan law established to look at the federal, state, county, and tribal systems affecting the welfare of children. And it's the Commission on Native Children for American Indians and Alaskan Natives, who are and as tribal entities, tribal political entities, have sovereign rights. And but the Commission on Native Children also includes Native Hawaiians.
mm-hmm.
And as a entity, Native Hawaiian do not have sovereign rights the same way as federally recognized tribes do.
Oh.
And so we have territories, Guam, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico. They do not have state sovereign rights either. And their indigenous populations do not have sovereign rights as entities or political governments. And so sovereignty means the ability to govern oneself, to make rules and laws, and to enforce those, to have jurisdiction over those rules and laws and the citizens of that nation.
Okay, so that's an ongoing struggle.
That's an ongoing struggle.
You've spoken about the idea that there are active cases, and there are, for example, fights over just water sovereignty on land that is already recognized as a tribal land. So it sounds like that is not something that's going to be fully affirmed and enforced if we continue to have these fights, because there are federal infringements and other things that are impacting tribes' ability to be sovereign in that way.
Well, there's state infringement on tribes. And like I said, I'm not an attorney.
Sure.
A lot of this is legal. But there are state infringements of federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma that, and it's about jurisdiction,
mm-hmm.
and who has the right to govern. And so I think what we see is that the 39 tribes in Oklahoma is collectively one of the largest employers of and contributes to the economy
Absolutely.
of Oklahoma in the billions of dollars. I think the concept of being a good relative, there's uniqueness to each one of the federally recognized tribes, but there are also some common features like being a good relative, understanding, extended families, recognize we're spiritual beings. So there's some commonality, but the way and the specific language or the specific teachings or the specific practice can be unique to particular tribes. And so the concept of being a good relative within the tribes in Oklahoma. And you see this in the advertisements that they have on TV, non-tribal community members saying the tribes have helped with building bridges. The tribes
Absolutely.
have helped with schools. Yeah.
Roads and infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Even though it may not necessarily benefit their tribal member directly, it benefits the community in which the tribal members are live in.
Absolutely.
or the counties that are in that area.
Sure.
So the understanding that tribes have a right and a responsibility because of jurisdiction to take care of their community members as well as their neighbors. And so tribes have been able to do this in different ways because they bring so much to the economy. And that right and responsibility, it's not a burden. I think that when we practice the understanding of being that good relative, it is the desire to have that right and responsibility because it allows that decision making, that being able to govern ourselves.
Right. Well, and beyond that sovereignty, and I think some of what I've heard even here in Oklahoma speaks to this idea that there are things that are as important as sovereignty within tribal cultures, including reclamation. There was so much lost in forced removal. There was so much lost in the forced boarding schools, and in a sense, the removal of the tribe from the child being raised in this Western school against their will and separated from their family and from the generations around them. And yet there is so much beautiful work going on right now related to reclaiming and increasing language speakers within tribes and the traditional tribal arts movements and other things. We talk in this series about space for community and sustainability of community. And these efforts seem so much related to the resilience of tribal citizens over time that belong to these different cultures and communities, but are actively seeking to preserve and enhance and bring back the flourishing of the cultural aspects that in many ways have been harmed or stolen. Could you say a little bit about the aspects of resilience and reclamation that you see happening in tribes?
Well, I think that tribes have always had resiliency, and tribes have always sought to reclaim what has been lost, and it has evolved into more comprehensive or spectacular ways of telling that story. And I think that resiliency is the individual and collective lifting up of one another. And there's always been creativity in our tribal communities. I mean, you look back at the pottery that was made, or the basketry, or beadwork, or the dress, the sewing. I mean, the Caddos used the material that was around them historically, which was willow bark. And, who would have thought that you could make such, beautiful clothing out of willow bark? But, it was a process. And again, it was experimenting. This was science,
right,
as well as creativity. And the desire to recognize beauty, even when things are sort of bare necessities. So the clothing, that's huts. How do you keep warm in the wintertime and still have a cool in Oklahoma summers?
Right.
But to have that creativity to build, high ceiling huts that you could open up and have the wind blow through and have that circulation, and still have, warm homes and warm comforts during the winter time. All that creativity, I think it's being demonstrated in just different ways now when we think about art or cultural displays.
Mm-hmm.
The University of Oklahoma Native Student Powwow was in April, and they had, 20 or 30 vendors, and each one of the vendors had just absolutely beautiful displays of many different kind of things.
Sure.
They had, the normal things in terms of T-shirts, but they also had ribbon skirts. And so we always have had skirts. And I can remember as a young girl, we grew up very poor. We had a wooden stove. We had kerosene lanterns. We didn't have electricity.
Mm.
And ironing my grandmother's dresses. And this was back in the, mid 50s and 60s with the old iron, and the skirt represented her sense of beauty because she liked color coordinated things. So you could look at her dresses and they'd be from deep purple all the way to very pale pink.
Oh, wow.
And that was the way her slips were because they had buoyancy, And so now the evolution of that, those kind of skirts to ribbon skirts.
Sure.
And just, the of course, as a grandmother, all the infant and young children kind of clothing.
Yes.
But there was beadwork, there was paintings, there were posters. So the abundance of all of this creativity, I think everything has a short story or some kind of story to be told,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the ribbon skirts or whether it's the T-shirts or whether it's the coffee cups with, various logos on them, but their meaningfulness. So as we think about the resiliency comes through because of the experiences.
Sure.
And I think by how the 39 tribes, they're all thriving financially at different levels and different cultural teachings and applications.
Mm-hmm.
But they have established, tribal sovereignty, tribal governments. They're providing services to their tribal members, but also their tribal members that are not part of their tribe, and also to their community.
Right.
So I think as we see it, we see it displayed by all the opportunities to uplift one another.
Mm. Everybody. It's such a beautiful way of seeing our shared humanity, and that's one of the things that we always speak about in this space is the diversity of human experience and the important ways that we can see and celebrate, but also protect and advocate for each other across our differences. In this last few moments that we have, are there any other things that you would want to leave us with as members of this land, tribal and non-tribal, indigenous or of European ancestry or African American ancestry? Are there things that you feel are really important for us to carry with us into those spaces, in the world around us, in our encounters?
We have a bigger recognition of land acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
This is a practice that has been more formally institutionalized through our relatives who are Aborigine from Australia and New Zealand. But in reality, land acknowledgement has always been part of our ceremonial teachings within our tribal communities, because each time we have established a home, there's always been an offering made. And that offering has been about acknowledging how we stand, what space we occupied, that we want this space to be safe. We want this space to offer protection. We want this space to be a place where nourishment can occur, where there can be a welcome, where there can be a sense of invitation. So maybe going back to the beginning where we talked about invitation, I had the gift of being invited to many different communities, and there's always an offering. There's always a beginning blessing. There's always words of acknowledgement. And so I think that as we think about land acknowledgement, it's not just saying who was here prior. It's saying how do we bring safety and invitation and do no harm to those who are within our circle, within our space. And that as we expand our circle, how do we make certain that those that are in our circles experience safety and protection and acknowledgement, that there's awareness of that history, there's awareness of the future, there's a sensitivity to recognize the differences that exist and to be sensitive to those that have needs, huge needs. And how do we bring them safely into these circles so that they can thrive? And certainly they have resiliency too, because they wouldn't be here if they didn't have. But maybe they're not thriving in a way that allows for full purpose of who they are and how they can exist and how they can be relatives that we want to have conversations with.
That's so beautiful, because it's not just acknowledging our history, but it is choosing to live into a better present and future for all of us.
Yeah, I think that we have different prophecies that talk about the future, and how do we help bring action to those prophecies? Because the prophecies are about us, about all of us collectively, jointly. How do we take that pathway of honor moving forward, rather than shame or fear or hostility or violence? How do we step into this circle in an honorable way, with honor and respect and generosity and humility and graciousness, and extend that invitation so that other individuals feel that same graciousness?
Absolutely. Wonderful conversation. I so appreciate your perspective and your time and your willingness to share this space and help us understand more. Thank you, Dr. Bigfoot, for being with us today.
And you're taking me to lunch, correct?
Yes. Yes, I am. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Thick Descriptions Elephant in the Room Unboxed. Want to learn more about us, what we're doing to disrupt traditional educational methods? Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. thickdescriptions.org, 405-397-0584.